Hey youth group, Ben from the core team, and this week, thanks to Daniel's suggestions, I am going to try and do a video segment as my theology talk, more or less, in place of doing a live theology talk in Discord. That way you guys can watch this at your leisure, and things should be hopefully easier for you in that regard. Now this week, interestingly enough, I have gotten behind, as I do in my regular video stuff, and I have not actually prepped a theology talk this week. But I did want to actually sit down and, as much as I can, tell my story within a reasonable frame of time. One, because I think it's easier to do on camera, at least for me, because I'm actually more comfortable talking to a camera than I am to a group of people, at least at this point in time in my life. Socially awkward though I am. And two, I think it's just good to have a recording of it, because I don't think I have a recording of it. I've told bits and pieces of it over the years. Some of you in youth group, depending on which small group you were in, or if you happen to be either working or went on to the confirmation retreat from, I think it was last spring, maybe, something like that. I told a piece of the story then, but I actually wanted to really go through everything. Now, a lot of people's sort of story of how they either sort of became Christian or sort of rediscovered the faith are a lot shorter. Mine tends to be a little bit longer. You've probably already noticed that with the timestamp of the video, but I'm going to kind of do what I can to keep it relatively concise while still telling as much, if not everything, of the story that I can. So I grew up in a relatively Catholic family. It's sort of a generational downgrading, I guess you could say. Very much traditional Catholic families in terms of my grandparents, my great-grandparents, my aunt and uncles, hit and miss. And my parents, I was raised in the faith. You know, I went to CCE classes growing up because that's what you did. And then you reached a point where you start leading up to confirmation. When you're a little kid, you go to church, you take the classes and things. But most of the time, you have maybe a couple of high points where you're kind of like, this is really cool, and I'm into this, which is, in most cases, for if you're raised Catholic, it's first reconciliation, first communion, and then you kind of trail off for a while. Unless you happen to be part of a really good dynamic Catholic family, which I was not. It was a Catholic family, but not a family that was that into their faith. You know, we went to church on Sundays, prayed before meals at my grandparents' house, and that was about it. So there wasn't a huge level of devotion and prayer in my household growing up. So around the time, it would have been 8th grade at that point, leading into 8th grade, middle school era. It's leading up to confirmation. What my parents told me is what they told my brother is, you go through the thing, you gotta do what we say and go through all this. Once you're confirmed, you can do whatever you want. Because I was like, up to the point and you're good. So I was like, good, if I get good, I'll go in, I'll get confirmed, I don't have to deal with any of this crap anymore. So that's kind of the mentality I went about going through about things. Now, just before my freshman year of high school, which is the way my parish worked, it was the 8th grade class kind of goes through the confirmation class stuff, and then usually like the fall, beginning of 9th grade in October, there was the confirmation. And so I was just kind of, going through it all, just fairly apathetically moving through life. My middle school time was mixed in terms of school and things like that. I was bullied a little bit, so didn't have the best self-esteem level at that point in time. But then things started to change when we got a new youth minister in my parish, a guy by the name of Daniel Strudwick. Now Daniel was really awesome, and he really ended up being sort of a mentor to me throughout high school. Partially, one, because he was a doctoral theology student at Duquesne, so he could really talk the faith, and that's kind of where sort of my interest in theology really kind of got kicked off, because you really could go down the rabbit hole with him in that way. And the other thing that kind of sparked my attention with him is he was a former seminarian. Now, that's where I sit these days, but that's a later story for later on. But he had two pictures in his office, one of meeting then Mother Teresa, now Saint Teresa of Calcutta, and then Pope John Paul II, now Saint Pope John Paul II. Really, really cool, and kind of, I feel like it's similar to the way Jonah is now. When you have a youth minister that you kind of connect with, there is a guidance to that. And so I started talking with him. I was doing what they call Dustbusters, which is Saturday morning I'd go and clean the church once a month. And for a while it was just me and my mom and the youth minister doing it because our crew was real small. And I was the only one that was like consistent in doing it. And so by the time my confirmation rolled around, when you need like work hours for your confirmation or like something service hours, and at that point he was just like don't worry about it, like you're good, like 6 times over. But I was still, again, it was like there was the apathetic 8th grader. I didn't like care. Then we did a confirmation retreat, which was a weekend, which I really like. I like the weekend confirmation retreats. I think they're better, but constraints, parish budget things and things like that. But because I feel like it's hard to cram a weekend into an afternoon, but it's possible. But so it was like, yeah, you got to go on this retreat. It's way out in the middle of Amish country. We did. It was two. That probably still is. It was like 40, 50 kids. I say kids, teens. I'm an old guy now. The first weekend, and then a month later, it's the second half. And the way it was, where I kind of came from, is that it was like half of my entire school class. So there's a couple hundred kids in the class, and like half of them were getting confirmed, and like 3/4 of them were going on the confirmation retreat. So I was seeing all my classmates, and most of whom I did not get along with super well. So it wasn't the most fun experience. I remember a handful of things from it, stupid moments about playing a song or something, and then a priest that we called the Jedi was like flying around because he was in his... he was a Benedictine, he was wearing the habit. They called him the Jedi because he was like floating through the air to catch a frisbee. But yeah, I didn't really remember much about that. Apparently we had Eucharistic adoration that weekend. I don't remember it happening at all. I think I fell asleep. So yeah, I didn't care. Just going through things, and got to pick a sponsor, go through the whole thing. I'm like, whatever. But something going through and the weekly youth group nights and stuff, and I guess something was nagging at me, and I'm like, this isn't that bad. And then came the day of confirmation. My grandfather was my sponsor. I actually don't remember my confirmation name. I think that's the name you're supposed to give to the bishop. I didn't. I gave him my name as Ben because I was nervous as heck because it was now retired Cardinal Wuerl, but then Bishop Wuerl. He's a very intimidating guy, unlike Bishop Zubik, who's a lot more friendly. Not that Wuerl wasn't friendly, but again, to a 9th grader, it's like I was told, like, you see the bishop probably once in your life, and it's your confirmation, then you'll never see the bishop again. That's how I was approaching it, because that's what I was told. So I go up, I'm nervous, whatever, confirmed, and I sit back down in the pew, and I'm like, huh. And I get this weird feeling, like overwhelming feeling, that's just like, holy crap. This is real! This isn't just stuff that's been blabbed to me over and over again when, growing up. Like, all the stuff that's been talked at me. This is real. And I'm looking around like, is anybody else getting this? Nobody? Is it just me? I think it's just me. And after that point, I was like, and my parents like, you go up with the youth group nights, up until you confirm, then you can do whatever you want. You don't have to go every week. So the next week rolled around, it's like, hey, it's Sunday. And I'm like, I think I'm going to keep going. And so I did. again and again and again, and to the point where I actually became the youth group kid. I became the guy that's what I did. I was either doing art stuff at school or I was doing stuff at church, and that's it. That was what I did in high school. I was also in a bowling league, but that's for another day. But yeah, I no after school stuff. I didn't do sports. I was not in theater. I was just I painted and I did church stuff, and that was my life in high school. And throughout the course of that, I started getting this nagging feeling again, of hey, you're missing something. We had great priests at my parish. We had sort of a rotation of Benedictines driving out from Latrobe and saying Mass, as well as doing retreats for us. So I would go on a retreat in it would be like February, would sort of be the winter retreat. And then in summer, I would work every confirmation retreat every single year. So I'd do like 2 in the summer and 1 in the winter, and 2 in the summer and 1 in the winter. And then my sophomore year, I started to do the mission trip, so that was another one in the summer. So I just event after event after event. There was also a point where the youth minister was like, I have like a permanent copy of your permission slip on file, and would just like change the name of the event every time. Because I was there for everything. I always had like the consent to be there, so it was just like, yeah, just whatever it is, just go. So going through that, it started to be like, maybe there's a thing to service beyond this, beyond just doing events. So I started to sort of feel the call to say, maybe you're supposed to be a priest or a monk or a friar or whatever. And that's an interesting time, especially if you're even now having sort of the nagging feeling that you might be called to the orders to some degree, whether that be a priest or a monk if you're a guy, or a nun if you're a woman. But at that point I actually had heard some horror stories about people coming out to their parents to some degree and tell them they're interested in religious life, and it being equally as terrifying as someone coming out of the closet as gay, because you don't know how your parents will react. Some people will tell their parents, hey, I'm interested in being a priest, and they'll basically shun them. So I was like terrified to even bring it up. And at some point I was like coming home from somewhere with my mom in the car, and I happened to just kind of casually drop it at the end of a conversation, seeing how she'd react. And she's kind of like, oh, okay, interesting. And then, without my knowledge, my mom proceeded to forward my name, basically forging a letter to varying religious orders. And like a month later, suddenly in the mail, I was getting packages from Franciscans and Benedictines and Carmelites and Jesuits, and I'm like, what is happening? And it turns out my mom was actually very excited for me. So she put my name out there and got a bunch of information back. And this was probably like junior-ish year of high school. And so then I started doing come and see weekends for anyone that would take me. There's a thing where a lot of places won't even give you the time of day unless you're 18, which is understandable. But I'm like 14, 15, going to friaries with like college-age students, and it's very strange. So I did that for a while too, and I was like really interested. I started praying Liturgy of the Hours, because that's what everyone prayed. And I was doing more of those, and it got to be my senior year of high school, and everyone I knew had done college visits by then. A lot of people started college visits their junior year. I was now like 2 months from graduating, and it was like, I've not even been to a college. I've been to like 3 seminaries. So I was like, alright, well, the one group that actually really gave me the time of day, that really kind of fostered my vocation at that point in time, were the Capuchin Franciscans. Ding! And so I was like, okay, let's actually maybe look into this. So I was 17, I started the application, which took a while, because it does. There was interesting a number of things, including a nice long psychological evaluation, which everybody entering the seminary gets. But there was also questions like, well, you're not even 18 yet. Are you sure? You're not crazy? Not crazy. A little dumb, but not crazy. But yeah, so it ended up being that coming out of high school, it's like everyone went to college, and then I went to the seminary, just because that's all I did. Because I was like, well, it's the only thing I'm interested in. Let's do it. And of course, at that point in time, too, some of you guys know me for my art. I had no intention of doing art professionally or full-time or anything like that. This is actually the absolute last thing I wanted. But again, that's I think a story for another day. So yeah, I went fall of 2008. I entered into Bonaventure Seminary in Cleveland, studying with the Capuchin Franciscans, with a class of 4 in the Franciscans, but if you include the diocese guys, it was 13. And actually, I was there about a year and a half. It was actually some of the best year and a half of my life. A lot of fond memories from that. And it's rigorous. It's a little bit more than a regular 4-year college experience. Because a 4-year college experience, you take your 4 classes a semester and you're good. I was taking 5 classes a semester, plus prayers and events, and service projects and whatever else the friars decided to throw us into, and it was a lot. It was a lot for someone who was 18. Too much, I think, not necessarily for anyone who's 18, but too much for me. I've never been a super disciplined person. And even after my first year, I started to kind of notice things in myself, and I'm like, I don't think I'm really ready for this. I mean, I had a lot of great friends. I was really in my element, but I was struggling with waking up early enough. I was struggling with my schoolwork started to falter, which it did in high school a lot too. I was never the best student in the first place. But I reached a point and I was like, I think I need to step away. And it was a really hard decision to make too, because it's like I love this. I love being here. Like I'm in my element here, but I can't be here. I got to step away, and and then I think I'll be back, but I just need to get the life experience, and that was tough. And I mean, there were a lot of things that contributed to it. I mean, an uncle of mine had died, and I couldn't come home from the funeral because I was too busy with things. There were contributing factors, again, to my own lack of self-discipline. But with all of those little things compounded, there was still the level of like I need to take a few steps back here. So I left after a year and a half, unfortunately, and found myself coming home, getting a regular job. I ended up doing a part-time night job working at a giant eagle down the road. Transferred over to CCAC, the local community college, and just started living more normally, I guess. So I got on a very different sleep schedule. I kind of was doing my own thing. Started working on my art a little bit more than I had previously, because I actually kind of realized that I like to paint more than I like to study. So I started pursuing that a little bit more seriously than I had previously. But again, the story of where I got to where I am with my artwork is another part of that story that I'm not going to try not to tell tonight. And then, yeah, so I worked that for a few years, and after roughly 2 years, it was 23 years, so 23 years, no. It was 2009 when I left. It was, I think, 2011 or so when I started kind of looking into things. So I was finishing up my associate's degree, thinking, okay, I want to go back. Like, I really want to go back. Like, at this point now, I was like, okay, I think I've matured enough that I can go back. So I was going through prayer. I started volunteering at the youth group again, at my old church. And I was loving it. I was getting back into the thing, going back through the rhythm. And I was looking through things. I'm like, well, the last time I was studying with a religious order. And the more I kind of sat on things, I was like, there's a lot of work, specifically with the Capuchin Franciscans. They have a big mission order in Papua New Guinea, They also have a big mother house down in Lawrenceville, but I didn't completely know that at the time, regrettably. But I was like, if I joined the Franciscans, I could get shipped out to, God knows where. It's like, I like Pittsburgh. I like the city. My family is here. Like, I like visiting other places. There are some people that are like, oh, I can't wait to leave. I'm not one of those people. I love the city. So I was like, let me actually look at the diocese. And around that time, at my parish, we had gotten a new pastor. We had actually had a pastor for... our old pastor was a pastor for a long time. Longer than most parish priests are. Because most parish priests rotate every like 4 or 5 years. If they're on sort of the regular cycle. Our guy was there for like 2 terms, plus another like 3 years since he was on his way to retirement. So he's like, let me just stay at this parish for a while. So we had our pastor there for a long, long time. So when we got a new pastor, we got a priest by the name of Father Thomas Ferracino, who some of you know as the sort of guy who spearheaded the Fall Retreat. He's also the current rector of St. Paul's Seminary. And he's the guy that really kind of re-inspired my sort of love and devotion to the priesthood, because he was a guy, great joyous personality, great preacher, and I'm like, yeah, I want to be like that guy. So I again took re-interest. I looked into St. Paul's Seminary, but this time it wasn't me and my mom helping me for half the stuff. It was just me at this point. This was late 2011, early 2012. So I was going through, doing the application process again, getting psychologically evaluated, which was funny because the first time I got psychologically my psych eval was like nervous. I was like picking at my shirt, and he like wrote that in his report. He was picking at his shirt, and like he might have ADD. I'm like, no kidding. The second time, I'm sitting there back, my legs up, I'm joking with the guy, and the guy's like, you seem really relaxed. I'm like, well, I've done this already. I know the routine. So it was a very different experience the second time through. But yeah, so I was pushing through it. Oh, you're gonna see me do this probably at least another 2 or 3 times. I remember back pieces of the story and reasons was brought back. So my first run in the seminary, I was sitting in prayer, the last confirmation retreat I did before the Eucharist, and I was praying, God, what kind of father do you want me to be? Do you want me a spiritual father? Do you want me to be like a dad eventually? And the sort of phrase I got back in prayer was, do not be afraid, which she says in Scripture a ton. And I was like, okay, that's not an answer to a question I asked. And it made sense then. It makes more sense in retrospect than it probably did then. And then my second trip in, one of the biggest catalysts for that, and I actually hate to backtrack, but piece of the story is really worth telling. Hating myself, I don't actually remember when this was. It had to have been 2011. My grandmother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She'd kind of been sick and feeling some like pain in her side for a long time. But the doctors always told her, we don't know what it is, but it's not cancer. And then when they found it, they're like, hey, it's cancer. You need to have surgery right now. And I remember that day just so vividly. I think a lot of times when you get bad news, you do. It was like walking into the kitchen, any other day. My dad's on the phone. I didn't think about it. Wall phone with the cord. I walk in. I grab like a granola bar out of the cupboard. I'm on my way out, and my dad hangs up the phone. And I've only seen my dad upset like maybe twice, like crying twice in my life, and it was one when my brother was graduating from college, and I'm like pointing and laughing. I'm like, ah, you're crying. The second time was this time. And he got off the phone because I don't know who was on the phone with. Might have been his dad, might have been his sister, but it was. And he had to face me and say, hey, Graham has cancer. And I'm seeing him just, God, I'm getting upset just thinking about this. Just starting to lose it, and he's like, his arms are at his side. He's like, it's his mom. He doesn't know what to do. And almost instinctively, I just opened my arms. And we're not, like, guys in my family, we're not emotional huggers or other such. Like, it's a handshake to greet people at family gatherings. But I just opened my arms, and it just really hugged my dad like I haven't hugged him in like probably 10 years. And he's just bawling on my shoulder like a little kid. And I'm standing there like, what do I do? Just sit here and rub his back, I guess. But it was just such a moment, and that was the moment, the catalyst moment, where I realized, I'm like, this is what I have to do. I have to be the shoulder to cry on. I have to be the person that someone can come to when they have nowhere else to go. And at that point, I at least thought that was my catalyst. It's like, I was opening my arms to my dad the way that a dad would open his arms to a little kid. It's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay. But total role reversal. I was doing it to him. And I'm like, this is what I have to do. And so, like, from that point forward, that was my big catalyst for going back into seminary, because it was like, okay, this is how I approach this, is to be the open arms. And so, again, I go through, I put the application through, and I get in. And so I'm like, awesome, I'm gonna do this, gonna go back to school, gonna finish things up. And both of my parents were already skeptical, like, are you sure? Because you left the first time. And little did I know how right they were. Because I went back, I moved in, I was feeling great. 2 days later, I'm going to orientation, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, this is great, this is like I never left. And then I kind of sat back and I was like, oh, it's like I never left. And not in the good ways. Like, there were good ways, like, yeah, it's good, I can go in a prayer, I'm good with the back and forth thing, with praying the hours in a group, and all the stuff I liked, but then all the stuff that I butted heads with was back immediately. And I was like, I can't be here. And it was it was hard to leave the first time. The second time I think was harder. Because I realized for 8 months I built up this concept in my head of, I'm going to go back and it's going to be great. And I'm sitting in my room, everyone else in the house is off applying for classes at Duquesne, and I'm sitting there praying rosary after rosary after rosary, pressing the crucifix to my temple, because I'm realizing this isn't right. So we had a prayer exercise that week that I was there, that was supposed to be the first week, where it was you go and you're saying prayer and you're encountering the Father, the Son, or the Spirit in prayer. There was like the Blessed Mother on the side, but actually it was the Blessed Mother that sort of came to me. And prior to this, I had never been a Mary fan. I kind of went through things with, like, yeah, nothing in Mary. But this was the point where she opened her arms to me the way I did to my dad. And she opened her arms and gave me that embrace and said, you know what you need to do. And that really upset me. Because what I know I needed to do was to leave. After I built everything up, after I thought of all this, all the planning, everything. But what I knew I needed to do was to step away again. And I was sobbing and praying the rosary, and I'm like, don't make me leave. I put too much work into this to leave. But it ended up being like that. I talked to everybody. I talked to the vocation director. I talked to the rector at the time, Father Joe Mealy, great priest. Also the vocation director at the time was Father Joe Freedy, also a great priest. The bishop sat down with me for one-on-one. Was like, "Are you sure? Like, we can work this out?" And I was like, by the time Friday rolled around, I was like, this is, I really do need to have to step away. This is not where I'm supposed to be. But it was actually funny too, because when I went back in, a friend of mine said, "I think you're going to know for sure this time." And I saw him a week later. I was like, "You're right. I did know for sure this time." But yeah, so I like that Friday leading into Saturday, like I had night prayer with everyone. At the end of night prayer, I kind of stood up in front of everyone. I said, "Look, I'm sorry. I know I haven't been here long, but I have to leave. I'm sorry I didn't get to know you guys better." And some of those guys I do know a bit now still, but not to the degree that I wanted to. And so I left. Saturday morning I packed everything up, stuck stuff in my car, and came home with my parents again. And that time, again, that time was harder. Because that evening I sat down with my mom. I was just in the living room, we were just talking about the past, at that point in time, 4 years of my life. Like, it was 4 years you go through high school, but like my 4 year college experience was ups and downs, and it was a roller coaster, for lack of a better metaphor, that unfortunately did not end with a "yay, we made it." It ended up with a crashing and burning in a ravine. So what I realized out of that was I had never actually really discerned the priesthood. Sorry, battery ran out. So I was talking with my mom and realized that I had built up in my head an ideal of what my vocation was. A lot of people like, oh well, the advice was always be open to what God's calling to you. Be open to the priesthood if that's what you're called to. But what I had done is I had blocked everything else out. I didn't date in high school, like at all. Never really was in any kind of relationship. Still haven't, embarrassingly enough. And never really pursued any other sort of push. So, like, I was like, well, I'm going to be a priest, that's what we're going to do, and that's the only thing, like, I got tunnel vision on it. So rather than, I thought I was like, I'm being open. No, I'm not being open. Not at all. I'm building up this fairy tale in my head of what the perfect vocation is. And rather than pursuing that, I pursued the idea. And realizing that, I was like, huh, you know? And that's where I kept kind of hitting the wall. Because I was following the idea, I was good with the ideal. But as soon as it came to doing the work, to putting in the time, to with any kind of relationship, whether that be one that leads to marriage, long-term single life, or vocation, I wasn't putting in the work for it. And when I got to the point, like, you need to put in the work, and I was like, nope, I'm done. And that's where I sat. And I was like, okay. Well, I did try the priesthood, or the route to it, and realized that I don't have the discipline for it, I don't have the drive for it, and I don't have the vocation for it. I still have a great deal of love and admiration for priests and religious brothers and sisters, but that's not what I'm supposed to do. And that was really hard, to be 22 and realize that the past 8 years of my life, from the time I was 14 onward, I thought that's what I was going to do. And now I have to start over. And that's hard. That's not a thing that, even looking back, that's probably was one of the hardest periods of time in my life. So I went back to my crappy night job, started working more days, finished an associate's degree, and just lived that for 3 years. In sort of this, well, this is what I'm doing now. I don't have a plan, I don't have a drive. The only thing I focused on was art stuff and everything else. And then, pushing through the art stuff, I was like, well, at a certain point I quit the night job, because I'm like, I can't do this anymore, it screws with your sleep. Nobody should be working a night job long term, it's really bad for you, actually. So I quit, and for a year I just did nothing. Luckily my parents didn't kick me out. I just focused on getting better at painting, started looking into shows, gallery shows and stuff like that. And then after a year, one day I just wake up and I'm like, okay, I'm getting my crap together. And then it changed. Because I was like, this is the moment where I'm like, must have been 25, 20, 24 maybe. And I just said, that's it. All this crap stops. I'm done with sitting in not doing anything. And this is where things are going to change. So I picked up a also crappy part-time job. Shifted gears artistically, and that actually helped considerably, but again, story for another day. Started being more successful in that front though, and started being like, okay, we got to move forward. So I moved forward a bit, played around with some other jobs, and eventually landed a longer term good job working up at the hospital where I do now. So went, got that job, worked it, more success in art and painting, stability, things are going well. Prayer life is up and down a little bit. And it got to be where, hey, you can afford your own place, and here I am, and things kept going. And things have been kept going, roughly since then. But one thing that was always specific is I always sort of defined myself as an ex-seminarian. Because that's the only way I could define myself. Because I was still building it off of where I was. Like we used to be in seminary. That's who I was. So that's who I am. And there were sort of two key moments where things started kind of happening. One was the class that I entered in with in 2008 got ordained. Well, actually, it was split up because some of them was like a 3-year thing. Some of them got a year ahead, some of them fell a year behind because they went in with the friars and stuff. But I got to this point where like I'm seeing all these people that I went to school with, and I was like, holy crap! If I would have stayed, that would have been me. I'm glad I didn't stay. I'm nowhere near prepared for that. Which is more funny and more of I say that in more of a joke, but it's kind of true. Like I was like, I'm really not that, and I'm kind of glad at this point, because that wasn't where I was supposed to be, and it's good that I found it out early. And then the other sort of moment happened actually very recently, which is why I think this story is worth telling more now. So some of you may remember who are in youth group. We had a seminarian by, our seminarian for the parish. I meant to look up his name. I've already forgotten what it was. I think it's Dan, but I don't think that's right. No, it might be. I don't know. Guy with the beard used to be an actor. And so I was sitting, as many of you were, at the table down in the pit, hearing his vocation story. Another battery pack change. Daniel Roberts, by the way, a seminarian. And he was giving his sort of vocation story about how he went to LA, was working on becoming an actor, and then it led him actually to the seminary through being like, maybe I should be doing this. And listening to that, again, as you guys were as well, his story hit me, but not in the same way that I'm like inspiring me to go back in a third time, but started to realize, you know what? I remember these days of telling stories like this and using it as sort of a vector to get other people interested. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I sort of remember the formula of the story. And I was like, wow, that really isn't me anymore. And sometime after that, I really started to realize, like, I cannot define myself by who I used to be. And when I started really kind of analyzing that and thinking about where I've been, what it took me to get to where I am today, both career-wise as well as spiritually, I was like, as long as I continue to think about who I used to be, I can't move forward anymore. I'm just going to be living in the past and going to be doing the same thing over and over again. And going through that, I was like, you know, between sort of the big three of vocations of religious life or priesthood, which is some people define religious life and priesthood as two. I call it as one just because it's easier. Religious life, single life, and marriage. I was like, I think that my vocation actually is the single life, and there aren't a lot of people that fall in that category. At least not more devotedly, I guess. John McNabbage is actually one of them, and I do need to pick his brain sometime in the future. If you're watching, John, let me pick your brain in the future. But because I like the idea of getting married, but I don't see myself doing that. And given where I was with seminary stuff, going through that whole thing, and I feel like all of the experiences I've ever really had haven't actually led me to that dedicated life of service and prayer, but a life of service as a friend, as someone who is sort of passing by in between things. To be, as it was, that person who the shoulder was to cry on, the way I was for my dad. I was the person who was there at the time. So I opened my arms. And I think that's who I have to be. And for all of the time since I was 14, until I would say the recent 2 or so years, I think it's finally come full circle for me that I've realized, like, this is what I'm supposed to do. My vocation is the single life. It's to be a rock for the travelers. Passing friendships, passing ministries, wherever I happen to go, is to be the one who can hold on, and to other people can hold on to ground themselves in a lot of ways. And I don't want to say I'm perfect at this point, because I'm not. That idea of saying that you can't live in the past, you gotta push forward and quit being who you used to be, that's hitting really hard for me right now too, because I'm trying to have a better prayer life. I actually have not had a good one in a while, despite how I might come across in youth group. But I'm struggling a lot, and it's hard for me to even admit that, because it's the same problem I had a couple of years ago. Is while I might be okay vocationally, saying I'm not trying to be a former seminarian anymore, and I'm not living in that past, I'm still living in a past trying to be like, I used to be better at praying. Why am I not anymore? But I have to keep reminding myself that, no, how you are now is not who you were. And I think if I'm going to end on any kind of a note, any kind of a moral, theological teaching here, is you've got to look forward. Christ died on the cross not for who you used to be, but who you are now, and who you're going to be. So as a personal note, that is something I need to accept, but also something I think a lot of other people might need to accept too. So I've been sort of telling my story, long-winded though it was. You guys can maybe relate to some of that. If you guys have any questions, let me know in the Discord chat. And yeah, okay, sorry I didn't really have another theology talk this week, but I've been wanting to kind of really tell my story in most of its entirety. I'm sure I'll go to sleep and remember like 6 other sub-stories that were part of this that I forgot to tell that were also important. But in its fullest note, that is where I was, where I've been, and hopefully where I'm going. Not everyone's story has a nice little bow on it. Mine still kind of doesn't. I mean, it has the bow of, I'm not supposed to be a priest. But everyone kind of grows and changes. I think a lot of stories that I hear, sort of these conversion stories, you get like this ton of bricks moment where they, it hit me like a ton of bricks and now I believe. For someone like me, it's a struggle. Every day, month, week, year is a little different. And I'm working at it, even though I'm bad at it. Just like I was in the seminary, I'm bad at self-discipline, so I'm bad at doing it myself. But I hope in sharing my story with you guys, you're kind of maybe help me along as I hopefully can help you along as well. Let's end in a prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Jesus, thank you for this time together, whether those are watching soon, later, in the future, way down the road. I hope that what I was able to share this evening could be in some level of an inspiration, that your work through your hand in my life can be a catalyst for anyone watching out there. And we pray through the intercession of your Blessed Mother that she may guide us as she once did for me. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Have a blessed week, everyone. Leave your comments and questions from this in Discord, and I will see you guys next week.